Really interesting interview for you guys today with someone who is a candidate for governor of New York. Fascinating, Zephyr Teachout. Wait till you find out what she's about. Now you'll find it even more fascinating. She's an associate professor of law at Fordham Law School. She's a major scholar in campaign finance law. She was the first national director of the Sunlight Foundation. She was involved in the Occupy movement. She co-founded New Way Forward, and she was the director of internet organizing for Howard Dean in 2004. Whoa. Okay, so Zephyr, great to have you here on the Young Turks. First question is obvious. Wait a minute, Andrew Cuomo is the governor of New York. He's running for re-election. I was given to understand he's so progressive that he might even be a candidate for president or maybe be on a ticket at some point. I mean, don't we already have a progressive Democrat in New York?
No, in fact, one of the reasons I'm running is I want to make sure there's at least one Democrat in the Democratic primary. Andrew Cuomo is a trickle-down Republican. He's had one major economic development policy, and it's tax breaks. Tax breaks for big banks, tax breaks for the wealthiest New Yorkers, tax breaks for his donors to his campaign. And, you know, New York is a truly democratic state. People here believe in public education. They believe in small class sizes. They believe in protecting the environment. They believe in investing in infrastructure, and Governor Andrew Cuomo has failed to do all those things.
So he blocked a higher minimum wage, but wound up giving a tax cut to corporations anyway. In the last 6 months, 16 billionaires have put money into his. That's amazing, isn't that? 16 different billionaires have given money to him. But now that is given the advantage of having a $35 million war chest. So then you're for getting money out of politics, but money is still in politics, and he has all of it. How do you combat that?
Well, I mean, this is an issue you know very well. But it's one instance in which, when we look at the primary, in a Democratic primary in New York, 500,000 to 800,000 people will vote. These are high information voters. There's an opportunity for a true grassroots movement. We saw that in Hawaii recently. We saw it in Virginia recently. And the other advantage we have is that Andrew Cuomo keeps stepping all over himself. He's made some serious political blunders, and he's, more importantly, shown that he isn't really working for the people of New York in the last couple months. There was a major scandal involving the Moreland Commission, which is anti-corruption commission that he himself set up and then shut down when it got too close to his own donors. A major New York Times story about 3 weeks ago showed that his top aide had been interfering in subpoenas being issued by that anti-corruption commission, and Andrew Cuomo has refused to answer questions about it. And people in New York are really paying attention.
Yeah,
it's a failure of leadership.
Yeah, we did a story about that on the Young Turks. I was amused when he said, "I can't be interfering with the commission. It's my commission. I can do whatever I want with it." Well, that's a unique excuse.
Laws apply to all of us, even the wealthy and well-connected. And even if you're the governor, the laws apply to you. And that kind of approach, you know, it's mine, 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 suggests that he's forgotten that basic idea.
Yeah, so now let's talk about some of your ideas, because I found those much more interesting. So you want to block the Comcast Time Warner merger. So how and why?
The why is really straightforward. Cable bills are too high. Workers have a hard time negotiating with big cable because there's so few companies to negotiate with, so they can easily pay low wages and not give good benefits. And it's affecting our media flow. We have a certain number of cable companies that control the information we get. That means they can actually dictate our political information. So in New York, the Public Service Commission is reviewing the Time Warner Comcast merger. And in New York, those companies that want to merge actually have to prove that it's in the public interest of New York for them to merge. They have the burden. Well, they haven't met the burden. It's not in the public interest of New Yorkers to have this new hybrid. So what we see is that we should use the state power to stop this merger and stop it in New York. I think that'll have a big impact nationally, but my focus is, of course, in New York. And Andrew Cuomo, if you really wanted to show leadership, would be using his bully pulpit and encouraging the PSC to do further investigations, hold more than just a handful of hearings, be really transparent about the information they're taking in and block the merger.
Yeah, I would be shocked if Andrew Cuomo was opposed to the merger. I've yet to see him opposed to any corporate idea. So that would be a first, and it would be interesting. So, all right, now, do you have a sense of whether that message is resonating? Because it really is very unique in, if you can be very unique in politics, in that, you know, people will say, oh my God, that's like populist and you can't do that. And then they'll also make the charge that it's too inside baseball and that it won't necessarily resonate with the voters. So what's been your experience?
Well, I'll tell you my experience is if you get in a room and start talking to people about their cable bills, everybody has a story. But let's talk seriously. This is what we used to call antitrust, or the populists of 140 years ago had their campaign slogan was "Down with Monopoly," or Thomas Jefferson, who thought we should have an anti-monopoly clause in the Constitution. What I'm talking about, and Tim Wu, my running mate, are talking about, is a very old idea. And it's the idea that if you concentrate private power too much, if you allow private power to dominate the market, it is also going to move over into the political sphere and dominate the political sphere and be dangerous and bad for politics. It's like a feudal takeover of the political sphere. Now, we have a challenge, which is that nobody knows what monopoly is anymore, and only a relative few people know what antitrust is. And if you say the PSC in New York, they don't know what that is. But I'll tell you, if you get in a room with a bunch of New Yorkers, they all know that there's too few companies that have too much power. They know that small businesses can't compete. So part of our job is reintroducing an old American politics of antitrust and anti-monopoly.
So the trick there, of course, is to get into that room. So with him having $35 million, and I imagine you do not have $35 million in your political campaign, how do you get New Yorkers to actually find out about your message? Because I think if they did, I suspect that they would be very open to that. I think the regular set of pundits are incredibly wrong about that. When you say, hey, do you want the cable companies to have more power? My guess is you will get a shout from the mountaintop from everybody in any state saying, no, no, I do not want them to have more power. So, but how do you get that message to them?
Well, I'm an old-fashioned politician. I go room to room. I was in a couple rooms earlier tonight. This is my third event after 7:30 tonight. Most nights I do 2 or 3 events. And then I have an ally in a few special places, most notably Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo so much is concerned about me getting on the ballot, staying on the ballot, and having this debate about power and about money and about all his corporate donors, that he has done everything he can to keep me off the ballot, and in the process has made sure more New Yorkers have heard about my campaign than would have ever heard if he hadn't tried to stop me. So I had to get 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot in New York. That's the ballot access rules here. We got over 45,000 signatures because there's so many people disappointed, and he filed a challenge to those signatures. Well, we won that very short court battle, and then once on the ballot, and my name is above Andrew Cuomo's, and I hear he doesn't like that very much, he then tried to kick me off. We had a trial last week, a trial in a Democratic primary in which he tried to kick me off, claiming that I am not a New Yorker. We had 2 days of testimony of every apartment I've lived in, people who've come to visit. It was a very invasive trial. I mean, I make light of it, but it showed a kind of disrespect for the democratic process. He'd rather fight me in court than fight me in a debate about the issues, about money, about politics, about schools, about fracking. Now, this got the attention of a lot of press, including the New York Times. So I've gotten coverage in the New York Times 4 times in the last 10 days, including this extraordinary moment where the New York Times editorial board wrote an editorial yesterday called "A Teachout Moment." It wasn't an endorsement, although it said lots of very flattering things. But it said, I'm a serious candidate. Andrew Cuomo should stop trying to kick me off the ballot and debate me. So it turns out Andrew Cuomo's own desire for control has been the best friend of my campaign, because you can't peg No $35 billion gets you an editorial like that.
Right. So now to the challenge you have and to the kind of hardball he plays, look, I think that hardball also gets him in trouble sometimes, like with the Moreland Commission. He sets up the commission, says, go after anyone you like, investigate me, my team. And once they do, he says, okay, I'm going to play hardball and cancel the commission. But you can't really do that. But in your case, you were lost a nomination to him already with the Working Families Party in New York. I'm sure that if you don't live in New York, or maybe even if you do live in New York, a lot of people might not be familiar with that party. So tell us what that is and how that process unfolded, where that party, which is supposed to be substantially more progressive, wound up going with a governor. It's not a very good progressive track record.
For myself, but I'd say for all New Yorkers, a very exciting political season. Tim Wu and I are bringing the politics back into politics. I ran, as you suggested, in the Working Families Party. In New York, you can run on multiple lines. And I was also planning to run in the Democratic Party all along. Andrew Cuomo was so threatened by my run that he agreed to a whole series of really important concessions. I mean, people outside New York may not know this, but he has not campaigned for Democrats. He has not acted like a governor who wants a Democratic Senate. And he's basically encouraged a group of breakaway Democrats to govern with the Republicans. So only by engaging in that Working Families Party primary, he so badly wanted the nomination that he made all kinds of promises. Basically, he finally promised to be a Democrat. The Working Families Party, I think understandably, I would have loved the nomination. But I support their general project, chose to nominate him because of the agreements that he made, understanding that the nomination would lead to an assurance that he would fulfill those. But there was so much in there that, well, there's so much that wasn't in there. I felt it was important to continue to run because we still needed basic, New York should have a Democratic governor who actually wants to pass a Democratic platform, not one who has to be forced into it by an unknown law professor with a funny name.
Well, I understand that people with funny names have won elections before in America, so I wouldn't sweat that part. So now I know that you care deeply about getting money out of politics. By the way, Tim Wu, who's your running mate as lieutenant governor, for those of you who don't know, he's a Columbia law professor who is the person who coined the term net neutrality. So you guys have been working on a lot of important issues throughout your careers. And on the issue of getting money out of politics, what would you do in New York so that the next Zephyr Teachout doesn't run into the problem that you're running into now, where you have this enormous imbalance of $35 million compared to whatever you have? Again, I suspect it's not even 10% of that.
Well, there's this great pack called Wolfpack.
All right. Wait, that's a great way to butter me up. Yes, Zephyr Teachout, everybody. No, all right.
Yeah, look, I mean, you and I have spoken before a few times, and I followed your work for a long time, and I think we have a shared, in a very serious way, a concern about the direction of our democracy and your leadership on using the powers that we have, and as compromised as they may be, to actually transform the system is so important. So in New York State, there's broad support for public financing of elections. And that has been, I'm a dog on the bone about that. That's what I've been fighting for the last 10 years. I had to take off for this campaign, but a board member of the Public Campaign Action Fund. I've been a member of Friends of Democracy. And Larry Lessig has been a colleague and friend in this fight for a long time, and just today actually sent out an email saying this was the most important fight for people to get involved in state races, because it's really about money in politics. I believe that Andrew Cuomo, in a different campaign finance system, I don't know that he actually has a democratic vision one way or the other, but if he had to be responsive to voters instead of big donors, I think we'd see a lot more funding for schools.
So it's interesting how the public financing debate went down in New York. Now, Andrew Cuomo would claim that he was in favor of public financing, but in that same New York Times article you mentioned earlier about the Corruption Commission, it seemed to indicate that it was a half-hearted support. Then behind the scenes, he really didn't do much to fight for it. I assume that if you won, you would consider it a mandate to push for public financing. But, you know, what's your sense of why, in your opinion, Cuomo has not fought for something that is so popular, especially among Democrats, but for most of New Yorkers?
He stood on the steps of a courthouse named after Boss Tweed 4 years ago and said he was going to clean up Albany and promised that he would pass public funding of elections, because if we didn't change the way campaigns are funded, we couldn't do anything about corruption in Albany. And I believed him, and a lot of New Yorkers believed him. He has repeatedly claimed that he is in favor of public financing of elections, but it is his favorite broken promise. And I can't look into his heart and say why he doesn't actually use the extraordinary power of governor to push this through. But I can say that he's taken over $6 million from corporations, which is more than any other governor. And in this race right now, maybe the reason he didn't want public financing of elections is that if we currently had public financing of elections, you wouldn't be asking me about his $35 million compared to my, 250,000. You'd be asking me about his $35 million compared to my $4 million or more. And that's all I would need to wage the kind of media campaign so that we'd be on a closer to even playing field, if not on a playing field. So perhaps the reason he didn't want public financing of campaigns is before he knew my name, he was scared about a true Democrat coming along to challenge him.
All right. Now, one more thing that I found interesting on your platform, it's the freedom to unionize. And that's why I'm fascinated by your campaign, because these are ideas you don't often see in American politics. You know, we've got a lot of people on the right end of the spectrum, and that place is quite crowded with a lot of different ideas, most of them disastrous, right? But there's not a lot of strong voice on the left saying, no, we need to pull the country back in this direction, not just, tread water. So what does it mean to the freedom to unionize?
Well, I just want to address your general point. There's way too much fear in American politics. There's way too much fear in New York politics. And, we should be proud of our heritage. We should be proud of FDR and his legacy. And I will tell you, when the American economy has thrived, it has thrived because of a complete commitment to small businesses, a complete commitment to unions and the right of association understood through the lens of workers organizing, not corporate personhood or corporate right of association. And I want to return to the traditional core that FDR stood for, which is respecting the right to unionize and respecting trust busting. Mm-hmm. And so to answer your question, in modern terms, we basically have to make sure the capacity to unionize tracks where our current economy is. So make it easier for car wash workers to unionize, make it easier for fast food workers to unionize, understanding that we don't actually have the same kind of economy that we used to have. So in order to have collective bargaining, you may need to set up different frameworks.
So, I feel that in America, we haven't, to your point, we haven't tried a populist campaign in a long, long time. And there was a really interesting article that I read at some point that had asked Democrats, hey, why don't you guys, it appears that might work, why don't you guys try populist campaigns? And they said, we also have donors. And they don't want to burn those bridges. So it's incumbent upon people like you who don't have as many entrenched donors and don't have 16 billionaires donating to your campaign to try a new method. Look, and oftentimes it works for populist right-wingers. I mean, just ask Eric Cantor how his establishment message worked out.
This is just something I want to, say to anybody who's thinking about running. There's so much joy in politics. I gotta say, I love it. I meet the most interesting people. I learn something every day. And we have everything to gain. We have a vision of a more equal economy to gain. We have the possibility of being, something that's very important to both Tim and I, is maintaining an open economy and maintaining a kind of openness towards immigrants. We can have a small business economy, an immigrant entrepreneur economy, an economy with good jobs, a place with great schools, investment in infrastructure. We have that to gain, and there's so little to lose by running.
Yep. Well, it's a fascinating experiment in New York. Curious to see how it turns out. Zephyr Teachout running for the governorship of New York with her running mate for lieutenant governor would be Tim Wu. So thank you so much for joining us, Zephyr. We appreciate it, and very curious to see how the race develops.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your leadership on money and politics. It's great to be on the show.